Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. Turn that up. There it goes. Turn it up a little bit. All right. So, this is another one by is it the History Nut? Nutty History. My bad. This is The Horrible Death of Napoleon Bonaparte. If you can click that thumbs up, bare minimum, please. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Click on the thanks button and donate to the channel if you want to sponsor a video. Keep the channel rolling. That one is strictly up to you. Okay? Let's get into the horrible death of. Oh, yeah. I can't show you the. Hold on. The thumbnail was brutal. Pretty sure it didn't look like he was vomiting up bees. But, let's go.
A bloated corpse, bleeding ulcers, a stench so thick it soaked the bled clothes and clung to the walls. After his death, blackened bile oozed from his mouth and stained the pillows red. This was the horrible end of one of history's most ruthless conquerors. Today, we reveal the true story of the death of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Has anyone seen that Napoleon movie? Came out a few years ago. I have not. I haven't heard great reviews of it, so.
A tale so gruesome that it is rarely told in all its festering reality. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769. When he emerged as first consul at 30, he was considered the most gifted military mind of his generation. Slight, intense, with dark eyes that seemed to read the room before he entered. A British diplomat wrote that he had the posture of a man used to winning, and the silence of one who didn't need to ask permission. How, then, did this architect of empire and self-proclaimed savior of Europe end up bloated, bedridden, and rotting in exile? He rose through ambition disguised as duty. In Italy, he took a starving, unpaid army and returned with gold, paintings, and a new republic. In Egypt, he lost ships and soldiers but came home a legend. When Paris turned unstable, he stepped into the power vacuum without a single shot fired. He was careful at first, issuing proclamations in the name of liberty, rewriting laws with the language of justice, but the ceremonies grew larger and the titles changed quickly. Within 5 years, he had declared himself emperor, standing beneath the dome of Notre Dame with a crown in his hands and no one left to tell him no. He became a man obsessed with image and control. He dressed in robes heavier than a soldier's pack and signed letters with phrases once reserved for kings. He renamed months, redrew borders, and seated his brothers on stolen thrones. Foreign monarchs shook his hand and then wiped their palms. He ordered painters to immortalize him as Caesar and surrounded himself with officials who referred to him as divine. To lose ground was humiliation. To make peace was weakness. And when his armies began to stumble, he blamed maps, marshals, and the weather, never himself. But to understand Napoleon's physical decay, we must understand France's decay. The Reign of Terror, which lasted from 1793 to 1794.
I just have to say, on the outside, as an American, how thankful it is to have had Washington, who resigned the commission twice as the general, and then later stepping away after 2 terms as president. Because I cannot imagine how a precedent would have been set to where you could just become a king in America. And we wouldn't be the country that we are. We got lucky.
Left France drenched in blood and in a state of what some would call moral bankruptcy. And although Napoleon played no part in its horrors, he rose swiftly in the chaos that followed. Public virtue had collapsed into private indulgence, and among the victorious classes, promiscuity became not just common, but expected. In the army, venereal disease reached epidemic levels, infecting more than half of all soldiers. Some historians believe Napoleon, who rose rapidly through military ranks and surrounded himself with mistresses, contracted a venereal disease during this period. The diagnosis of syphilis remains debated, but his symptoms, headaches, rashes, pain during urination, appeared as early as 1797, the year after he married Josephine. She, too, had a history of affairs and had become sterile by the time of their union, a common result of advanced gonorrhea. The symptoms worsened as his power expanded. In 1802, at the age of 33, he began to suffer attacks of stomach pain so severe that he collapsed onto the floor and screamed until he vomited. At the same time, his sexual appetite became erratic. He demanded the presence of women at all hours, yet his performance was often brief, mechanical, and followed by sudden, unexplained rage. His aides described these episodes as volcanic. He would shout, overturn furniture, and strike walls with the flat of his hand. These tantrums, once rare, became frequent and always ended in long, depressive silences. Reports from this period suggest that he began to contradict himself in meetings and struggled to concentrate for more than a few minutes. In 1806, he suffered from eye inflammation that lasted over a week. In 1811, his speech became confused and he began issuing contradictory orders, sometimes within the same hour. He accused allies of betrayal, then forgot the accusation. Physicians noted a tremor in his left leg and a persistent twitch in the corner of his mouth. He walked slowly and often needed help rising from a chair. He described sharp pains in his limbs, especially at night. These were symptoms consistent with tabes dorsalis, a late-stage syphilitic infection of the spinal cord. But no one dares...
I was just about to say, this sounds like something Al Capone went through near the end of his life with having conversations with people that weren't there and just all kinds of weird stuff. And I knew it was syphilis related. That's how Capone died. But I didn't know how it gets into the spinal cord. Oh, you must have it for a long time and to have gone untreated. Is it treatable now if it's in the spinal cord? Oh, like rabies.
say that word out loud. His courtiers blamed exhaustion, his generals blamed stress, but those closest to him began to whisper that the emperor was no longer himself. The turning point was exile to the island of St. Helena, a volcanic rock in the South Atlantic in 1815. At 46 years of age, Napoleon was shipped there by the British after his final defeat at Waterloo. The journey was humiliating. He arrived bloated, exhausted, and deeply aware that he would never leave. His health collapsed within months. He vomited daily, his appetite vanished, and the heat swelled his abdomen with fluid. The smell of decay began long before his death. Officers stationed near his residence noted that the rooms often reeked of vomit, damp wool, and rot. The same symptoms had struck 2 years earlier during the campaign at Dresden, when he was seized with violent stomach pain and sudden diarrhea that left him unable to ride. He lay in his tent, curled against the cold, while his army waited for orders that never came. His physician noted swelling in the legs, a weak pulse, and fits of shivering that would not stop. Aides begged him to pursue the retreating allies, but he sat motionless, wrapped in blankets, and refused to speak. "My mind resists," he said, "but my body gives in." It was the first time his weakness had cost him a war. The exile also marked a shift in his mind. Coincidentally or not, it occurred during the same period when he became increasingly obsessed with his legacy, rewriting accounts of his campaigns, censoring his letters, and lashing out at the British governor who confined him. Some historians suggest that the pain, combined with likely neurosyphilis, triggered paranoia and long bouts of rage, followed by silence. With limited movement, his body began to distort. The once proud profile seen in marble busts gave way to swelling in the face, sagging eyes, and a torso puffed with fluid. His legs withered, his muscles wasted. He could barely walk across the room without leaning on someone's arm. On bad days, he needed help getting out of bed. The island diet worsened his decline. Reports from his household described thick stews, spoiled meat, and cheap wine. Vegetables were scarce. The water was often unclean. Meals ended in gagging. Servants noted he would clutch his stomach and stagger away before finishing. His digestion slowed to a crawl. Every bite brought pain. The internal damage grew unbearable.
I've never heard any of this, but it sounds brutal. Oh, and this isn't, this is played out over years. This isn't like, he only suffered for 3 weeks. No, this is a long time. I probably didn't even trust doctors. Stupid question, but this looks like a dog in an outfit back here.
Tried to intervene, but their treatments only deepened the suffering. They applied leeches to his temples, lanced his swollen abdomen, and dosed him with calomel, a mercury purgative now known to cause organ failure. His tongue swelled, his pulse slowed, the blood he vomited turned dark. At times, he couldn't keep down water. The smell of his sick bed grew so powerful that aides opened windows even in cold weather, hoping the sea breeze would mask the stench. At 49, Napoleon spent long hours confined to bed, surrounded by the few who remained loyal. He spoke often of Josephine. Her portrait sat beside him. According to one valet, he once pressed a gold snuff box she had given him to his lips, whispering something unintelligible. The gesture was repeated, the words never were. By 1821, his final year, companionship had turned into care. Albin de Montholon helped administer his medicines. His valet, Marchand, wiped his mouth and dressed the sores on his skin. They were not servants anymore. They were witnesses, tasked with maintaining the last scraps of dignity in a man who had once crowned himself with his own hands. In his final years, Napoleon suffered from a long list of physical ailments. Modern experts believe he most likely had stomach cancer, compounded by tuberculosis and recurring liver infections. Some suggest syphilis, though this remains debated among historians. This mixture of conditions turned his last years into a slow collapse. Accounts from those on St. Helena described how the emperor shifted between bouts of vomiting and faintness, and long silences during which he stared at the wall without speaking. Napoleon's temper grew sharper as the pain increased. The once decisive commander began accusing those around him of betrayal, sometimes without cause. He dismissed trusted physicians, blamed servants for imagined slights, and refused to read letters unless they were first inspected by someone he trusted. At night, guards reported hearing arguments from inside his room, though no one else was speaking. His fear of being poisoned became obsessive. He demanded that food be tested in front of him and refused to drink from cups that were not his own. The kitchen staff were rotated constantly to prevent familiarity. His suspicion may have stemmed from arsenic rumors that followed him into exile or from the steady deterioration of his mind. As the months wore on, his condition worsened. By 1821, he could no longer sit upright without help. The swelling in his stomach had returned, tighter than before, and his skin had taken on a gray-green hue. Visitors spoke of foul air that clung to the curtains and soaked into their clothes. The house on St. Helena had become a sick room no one wanted to enter. During the final weeks, his body began to fail quickly. He developed a persistent fever, likely caused by infection in his stomach lining. His breath came in short gasps, and his hands trembled even at rest. Witnesses said he sometimes whispered the names of past victories, Austerlitz, Marengo, and Jena. But just as often, he said nothing at all. Curiously, though his decline was plain to see, no one on the island acknowledged that death was near. The British governor discouraged talk of his condition. Doctors continued to prescribe tonics. Even as his sheets turned dark with blood and his vomit smelled of iron, the fiction of recovery was carefully maintained. On May 4, 1821, realizing that his end was near, Napoleon finally allowed Abbé Vignali to perform the last rites. He had delayed the ritual for days, uncertain whether he wanted the final gesture witnessed. When asked if he died in the Catholic faith, he gave a slight nod. His mouth had dried, and he could no longer speak. This was his last deliberate act. In the late afternoon of May 5th, at 51 years of age, the once feared emperor took his final breath. But the indignity of his condition did not end with death. His abdomen, distended with fluid, remained hard as stone. The body was stripped, washed, and laid on a wooden table for dissection. The autopsy revealed a stomach almost fully consumed by ulceration. The interior walls had blackened and begun to rot. The doctors removed the organ and set it aside in a bowl of alcohol. The stench was so thick that Marchand, his valet, stood in the doorway and refused to come closer. Though stomach cancer was listed as the official cause, rumors of arsenic began within hours. The British dismissed the idea. French officers took note. The surgeons, uneasy and sweating, kept their tools and buckets of wine between each cut. During the following days, while the corpse awaited burial, the house grew heavy with the smell of decay. The shutters were kept closed, and sheets were pinned across the doorway. Officers were sent to collect flowers from the far side of the island. No embalming was performed. The British had denied the request. The French protested but received no reply. At night, guards patrolled the perimeter of the garden, not for fear of intruders, but to keep the house sealed from view. The body remained inside, wrapped in cloth and resting on blocks of stone as the skin lost color and the lips began to part. The man who had once crowned himself emperor, who had crossed the Alps and walked through the ruins of Moscow, now lay exposed and stitched shut, his uniform hanging loose across his frame. His sword was placed at his side. His hands, once quick with gesture, had curled inward and stiffened. His snuff box, that gift from Josephine, was left on the table beside him. One aide suggested it be buried with him. The others disagreed. The funeral finally took place on May 9th, 4 days after his death. Despite the rancid air, the ceremony was carried out with solemn precision. The British provided a simple coffin. The French lined it with tin. He was buried beneath a willow tree in the valley of the Geranium, his name absent from the stone. The governor insisted it remain blank. The inscription, he said, would only encourage legend. Ironically, Napoleon, who spent his life redrawing Europe in pursuit of a dynasty, saw his only legitimate son die in exile at 21, known not as Prince, but as Franz, Duke of Reichstadt. The empire he built collapsed within months of his abdication, passing not to his bloodline but to his enemies. France, exhausted and disillusioned, restored the monarchy he had once destroyed. The grotesque death of Napoleon Bonaparte serves as a powerful reminder of the limits of personal glory. The man who declared himself emperor, who demanded obedience from kings and reshaped laws with the stroke of a pen, was in the end defeated not by gunfire or rebellion, but by lesions in his stomach lining in the slow rot of isolation. His death marked not just the end of a man, but the quiet unraveling of a revolutionary myth. French historian Jean Toulard wrote, "Dying alone in exile transformed Napoleon from a political tyrant into a mere human." Others have pointed to the irony that a man who once dictated peace terms in imperial palaces died in a wind-blown garden surrounded by foreign guards and island farmers. The transformation of Napoleon, from youthful general with piercing eyes and volcanic energy to bloated exile tormented by disease, is one of the most haunting examples of how ambition, when stretched beyond its limits, turns inward. His political legacy, the Napoleonic Code, secular education, and the modern state still endures. But his personal end serves as a brutal illustration of the body's revolt against the will. The final months of Napoleon's life, filled with vomiting fits, disorientation, and hallucinations, stand in violent contrast to portraits of him crossing the Alps or standing triumphant at Austerlitz. The dissonance between public image and private suffering mirrors the fate of many great rulers. Thus ended the life of the man once called the God of War, not with a bang, but with fluid pooling beneath his cot. The man who made emperors kneel and cartographers redraw the world ended up like all men, a prisoner of biology. The death of Napoleon Bonaparte was not just a political event, but a mirror held to the myth of heroic endurance. As his muscles failed and his mind unraveled, so did the illusion of imperial immortality. The final irony in Napoleon's life is that the child he fought to legitimize and the crown he reshaped to secure vanished faster than his name could be carved into a gravestone. His son, born king of Rome, died without a throne, a cause, or future. His true legacy would live not in bloodlines, but in law codes, battle maps, and propaganda. Perhaps the deepest lesson in the death of Napoleon is that even the will of a titan cannot rewrite the biology of decline. The man who crowned himself could not uncrown decay. In the end, he faced the same fate as the peasant conscripts he had once sent into battle without shoes. The death of Napoleon Bonaparte is not merely a record of medical decline, but a reminder of nature's indifference to power. His body, once the vessel of command and myth, became a swollen mass riddled with tumors, dissected by foreign surgeons, and buried far from home. This story continues to captivate, not because of the victories he won, but because of the fragility he could not escape. The horrible death of Napoleon reveals not just how empires fall, but how men do. Thanks for watching.
Wow. That's a brutal end. And I've already done the horrible death of Ulysses S. Grant. That was that was difficult as well. Wow. And he was 51 when he died, too. Man. Just young. Oh. It's young, and it's he accomplished a lot of victories, a lot of death. Oh, all right. Well, hope you enjoyed the knowing, not the morbid part of it all, but I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time. Oh, he just rotted away from the inside. Oh, terrible. Have a good day. Have a good night.